You want me to bleep off? Okay, I guess the lab just wasted $4,000. So, I recently started posting to Reddit, and I have a lot of stories. This one happened during my first career, when I worked as a scientist in a diagnostic lab. I had been working for about 2 years at this point and had just been promoted to senior scientist. I had 2 supervisors in my section, each assigned to oversee half of the tests being done in our small corner of the lab, Rory and Tanya. Tanya was the senior-most supervisor of the 2, and secondary to my department head, she had the most authority over me on any given day. She also hated me. Never did figure out why, but she hated about 3/4 of the people working in the lab, so I never took it personally. I just don't think she liked people. The lab tends to attract people like that. Funnily enough, we always used to joke about being the rejects stuffed in a hole at the bottom of a hospital to be kept away from the general public. As for Rory, it's important to note that he had a very good reputation in the lab of never lying. He was never once caught in even a half-truth, and he'd been working there for over 30 years. He was well liked and well trusted. This will be important later. One day I was doing one of the more technically challenging tests that our department performs. It's long, fiddly, expensive, and easy to screw up. Only senior scientists are allowed to do it unsupervised, and this was maybe the second time I've done it alone. We are talking 2 days just to get it set up. It was a nightmare. While I was measuring out some gelatin powder into a beaker, I accidentally elbowed Tanya. Our workstations were right on top of each other. This happened at least 4 to 5 times a day with everyone. I apologized and go back to what I was doing, but she flips out, like full-on rage, screaming in my face, kind of angry. After a couple of minutes of her tirade, she says, "Just duck off, terrific moose. No one wants you here." And then she storms off to her office to cool off. Rory comes up to me, having seen and heard the whole thing, and asks if I'm all right. I say I'm a little shaken, but nothing too bad, and get ready to continue my work. But Rory had heard the whole thing, and he saw what test I was doing. He whispers to me, "Your supervisor told you to go. Best you do what she says, and if she causes a fuss about it, I'll be sure to tell the boss exactly what she said to you." Now, I knew Rory's reputation, so I knew I'd be safe. I also know that being told to leave early by a supervisor meant that I was still paid out for the rest of the day, provided I had worked at least 4 hours of my shift. The lab was actually pretty generous with time off, even if the pay and working conditions were shit. So I did exactly what Tanya had said. I ducked off home. Now, at the stage I was at with that particular test, I had spent about $4,000 worth of reagents. Normally batches of 20 samples are run to try and keep the cost down, but it was still an expensive test when you include the nearly 3 days of work from a single scientist. This was one of Tanya's tests, and therefore Rory was not required to ensure it was done. No one in my section was very happy with Tanya, and she had gone off to her office and so couldn't see me leave, so no one went to tell her that the test was left unsupervised. Apparently, she didn't come back for over an hour, and by then the test was ruined and had to be started over again. My boss was pissed. Tanya of course tried to throw me under the bus, saying I had left without informing anyone and that it was all my fault, but good old trustworthy Rory told the boss exactly what Tanya had said. I love Rory. I couldn't be punished for doing exactly what my supervisor had told me to do, so I got away with it completely. Unfortunately, nothing overly terrible happened to Tanya. She got formally reprimanded and had to take an anger management course that the hospital runs, but otherwise she got no real punishment. She never yelled at me again, and was always careful to word things just right around me after that though, so that was something. As for what I did on my half-day off, I went to the beach to enjoy the sunshine I almost never got to see working in the deep dark dungeon that is the average hospital lab. I made sure to bring in the pictures the next day. Update: I was teaching a class with Rory today and showed him some of your replies. He's genuinely touched by it all. He does recommend not naming your children after him though, as his name was changed for the story. Diagnostic labs will waste that daily just through simple errors. The boss was also, to all of you saying that $4 grand is too much waste for a lab, in the grand scheme of things $4,000 is nothing. Annoyed, but not disproportionately so. It's factored into the budget.
Now to the comments. Rory sounds like an absolute gem. I love co-workers like him.
OP replied. He was the best. He'd just talk about interesting things for hours. He had so many life experiences and so much wisdom. He would have been running the place if he'd ever learned how to do paperwork properly, lol.
Not everybody wants that kind of responsibility. I made sure to bring in the pictures the next day. Insult to injury. Perfection.
Yeah, this to me makes it the best malicious compliance, when you not only comply but get to rub it in at the end. I hoped he put the photos up in his cubicle.
I think the hospital handled Tanya just right. Reprimand and anger management. So, a mild punishment and steps taken to ensure it wouldn't happen again. Which worked.
OP replied. It worked for me specifically. She would still yell and scream at everyone else. They never bothered to report it because they saw no change after what happened with me.
They should have done. She'd failed the corrective steps, meaning that punitive steps, demotion, termination of employment, could be taken instead if there was a continued pattern of undesirable behavior causing a toxic work environment. Holy moly, what test uses $4,000 reagents? I'm going on a limb here and assume it's not the typical high-volume tests.
OP replied. Nah, it gets done maybe once every 2 months or so. I worked in a highly specialized area. Some of our kits went for upwards of $10,000. This was a homebrew test though, so we made everything from scratch, hence the nearly 3 days to do it. It was horrible. It was like what they used to have to do in the old days, lol.
Stand there cackling to yourselves while pouring mysterious substances from a beaker into a flask? OP replied. She actually wasn't annoyed at Rory at all, it's just who he is, he's honest to a fault.
I mean, if she didn't yell at you again, it looks like those anger management classes worked. Success all around.
Oh man. I'm going back to college after taking a sabbatical for being sick, and the degree I'm after is medical lab tech. It fascinates me, but is this really what working in a lab is like? I'm highly social and in general a people person, but being yelled at like that would result in me either yelling right back or crying. Maybe I need to think of another medical field use for an associate in applied science degree.
OP replied. Almost any medical field is rife with bullying. The lab is generally an exception. She was the only person I met who was like that. Several of my friends from university experienced similar things, but it was the exception, not the rule. Ward work is different. The culture there is just toxic. I loved the lab, and never planned to leave. I just fell in love with the clinical side of infectious disease, so decided against pathology as a specialty. There is nothing else quite like working in a diagnostic lab. It's hectic. You're undervalued and hidden away, so the people who are helping never even know you exist. If you want praise, it's the wrong career for you, but if you can take satisfaction in a job well done, it's a great place to work.
What exactly do you mean by ward work? I'm slightly interested in med as well, second-year college student. Do you still talk to Rory?
OP replied. Yeah, all the time. I'm teaching a class with him tomorrow. He's retiring next year and it'll be a loss for the field. He's a national treasure, that man. I still get invited to their work functions as well. I got along really well with everyone in my department even though I left nearly 10 years ago. We're a big family.
We always used to joke about being the rejects stuffed in a hole at the bottom of a hospital to be kept away from the general public. That's how a lot of IT workers feel. Yeah, work basement dwellers. Nothing happened to her is not actually correct. With the reprimand and anger management course, the organization can now fire her if she cuts loose again. The anger management course is not the reason that she is keeping her composure. It is also completely documented. Without getting into it, my manager sent me home for 2.5 days. I had done nothing wrong. I was notified that I could take it as PTO or dock in pay. I verified with HR that they had been notified, so I went home. Since I was salaried, no one can dock my pay. When my manager tried to mark it as PTO, I was able to prove that I did nothing wrong, and upper management informed my boss, and his boss, that they pretty much gave me an additional couple of days vacation and it would not come from my balance. She must have been pissed to take that anger management course, smile. Unfortunately, nothing overly terrible happened to Tanya. Are you sure? She was told to go to anger management, and was mindful of wording going forward. That's a pretty big hit to the ego.
OP replied. I meant Reddit terrible lol. Real world terrible doesn't cut it in the world of r/malicious compliance.